Welcome back to Bible study. This is our second lesson in our character study of our friend Joseph. A focus that, our intended focus during this series is the power of forgiveness. So, as always, we ask you to help us spread the word. If you're watching on Wednesday at 12 or 6:30, you know we're doing this in the moment, 12 and 6:30 on Wednesday. So you can share it. You can go to our Twitter page and retweet it. YouTube is usually where we have the most folk watching, so that's SMZBC Worships with an S. And dial pad 804-203-9011. But if you're watching Wednesday at 12 or 6:30, share the message, because right after Bible study we go live and we have an after Bible study discussion. If you're watching any other time, I just pray that the discussion on during this Bible study blesses you. You know, last week we began our study by looking at some background family history, particularly for Joseph and those connected to him. And so we heard and learned about his father Jacob. We learned about his mother Rachel, his uncle Esau, his aunt Leah, his grandparents Isaac, Rebecca, and Laban, and all of the drama. If you missed last week, you need to go back and watch it. We ran through as much as we could of the drama in Joseph's family, and it was a lot of it. And so if you missed that lesson, take a second, go back, check it out. You know, after you watch this one, to catch up with all of the dysfunctional family drama found in Joseph's family between the chapters of 27 and 37 in the book of Genesis. And we're going to start this week with listening to a few verses of Genesis 37 from the New International Version.
Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him.
We learned last week that Joseph's birth ended a long season of infertility for Jacob's beloved wife, Rachel. Jacob didn't hide his favoritism. If you go back and watch last week's Bible study, toward Rachel's firstborn, even though that was his 11th son. Now, one would think that Jacob might have understood the pitfalls of preferring one child over another after the debacle of his own parents' favoritism. But the truth is, even when bad behaviors and their consequences are modeled for us, we may still struggle to keep history from repeating itself. That was true in Jacob's case. And when you listen to these verses, Jacob doesn't seem to be aware of the extent of damage that he was inflicting on his own family by overtly favoring one child over the other. This man literally gave one of 13 children a special coat. Think about that. 13 kids, he only gave one a special coat. How do you expect the other 12 to feel and respond? And so for any parents watching, you must be careful when comparing your children or bestowing special favor on one of them over the other. While things will not always seem completely fair in your children's eyes, we have to make a concerted effort to make each one of them feel special, each one of them feel loved. In her book on Joseph, Melissa Spostra talks about how she attempts to do this. She writes, "My husband and I often take our children on special outings, individual outings. These are special getaways from the craziness of the everyday life to be intentional about understanding their joys and their fears by asking them questions and valuing them with time and attention. At times, we've kept track of these dates on a chart, so that they know when their turns are coming. I can't imagine, she says, if we were to practice this with only one child, the others certainly would feel left out. I've heard different parents share different ways to do this. Some keep a log, actually, of time, individual time spent, so that they won't overspend time. One of the things that I try to do with my kids is I understand that they each like to do different things. And so I try to connect with them in the time, in those moments, with the things that they like to do, and then make sure that you are still yet not trying to show favoritism. Now, for a minute, I want you to try to put yourself in Joseph's shoes. As a 17-year-old boy, what mixed feelings do you think that Joseph might have had about his position in the family? Though I'm sure he enjoyed being his father's favorite and all of the perks that came with that position, I'm also willing to bet that he didn't enjoy being ostracized, or as the Bible says, hated, quote unquote, by his brothers. I wonder if Joseph ever wanted to take off his special coat when he was around his brothers and apologize for this special gift. Perhaps as a 17-year-old, sometimes he paraded around showing off his favor, while other times he regretted not being able to have sibling camaraderie with his brothers. Eventually, that coat came to represent both the love of his father and the growing hatred and envy of his brothers, which we will see compounded in today's story. Now, here's a fun fact. The original meaning of the Hebrew word for Joseph's coat is a coat of extended length. Literally, a coat that extends to the hands and the feet. A modern day trench coat, if you want a visual. It wasn't until the ancient Greek translation of the Jewish scriptures when the coat started being referred to as colorful. If there was a takeaway from this week's lesson, it would be that the first step on the journey to forgiveness is acknowledging the hurt. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down, post it to social media, whatever site you use, so you'll get a reminder, especially for those of you who are on Facebook, you'll get a reminder of this next year if you post this today. The first step on the journey to forgiveness is acknowledging the hurt. We can never forgive without getting honest about our own pain. Rather than sweeping our feelings under the rug or pretending that we are not hurt, it is important to acknowledge what we feel. Ultimately, we cannot forgive without acknowledging the offense. So tell God how you feel about whatever hurt you have acknowledged. Talk about the hurt to the one who cares more than anyone else on this planet and who offers comfort, peace, and love to you. And I know we like to villainize Joseph's brothers, but these young men endured unfair neglect because of a birth order that they had no control over. Whether done intentionally or not, Jacob inflicted emotional wounds on his sons when he blatantly favored one over the other. While being on the wrong end of favoritism may not be your issue, you may be carrying some pain at the expense of others. So I want you to show some empathy to Reuben and the rest of his brothers. And I want you to dig deeper with me. Let's explore if Joseph added any fuel to the fire of his brother's hatred. First, let me say this, and I want you to hear me clearly today. In no way am I saying that Joseph said or did anything that justified his brother's actions. No, they were wrong, straight up. But sometimes we are not without blame in how we handle situations too. So let's think about, as we consider, how forgiveness applies when we play a part in a conflict. I want you to listen to Genesis 37, verses 1 through 11 in the New International Version. You'll hear the first four verses again, but pay close attention to the context, and then to what each brother said or each brother did.
Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers. the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them,
"Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered round mine and bowed down to it."
His brothers said to him,
"Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?"
And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers.
"Listen,"
He said,
I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.
When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said,
"What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?"
His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
Have you ever wondered why certain details are left out in biblical stories? I want to know what the brothers did that led Joseph to report them to Jacob. What was it, a major offense? Did they hurt the sheep? Did they steal something? Or was Joseph tattling on them for something minor, like taking too many work breaks? I don't know, and I probably won't know until I get to glory. Other questions we may have of this text: should Joseph have given a bad report to his father at all? Should Joseph have shared his dreams in the manner that he did? Was he guilty of fueling the fire of jealousy? Some scholars maintain that Joseph shouldn't have shared his dream. One wrote, even if the dream came from God, it was for his own encouragement, not for their edification, and he was very unwise to insist on telling it to them. But other commentators disagree. Another suggested perhaps Joseph might have been more diplomatic in the way he reported his dreams, but surely he was right in sharing them with his family. While the dreams came from God, considering the already contentious relationship, perhaps Joseph communicated them insensitively. We don't ever have to apologize for our dreams, for our promotions, or exciting news, but we should be careful to show some tact when choosing with whom and how we share them. Yes, we need to be mindful even with good news. An infertile couple will want to hear of a friend's pregnancy, but the news must be shared thoughtfully. A recently unemployed person might find it difficult to celebrate somebody else's job promotion. We must be careful to use discernment and tact in our own words so that we do not add fuel to the fire of someone else's pain unintentionally. Now, let's return to the question of the part that Joseph played in the conflict. Let's assume that Joseph wasn't completely innocent in his behavior. As you listen to Genesis 37 verses 12 through 37, does that mean that he deserved what he got?
Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph,
"As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them."
"Very well,"
he replied. So he said to him,
"Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me."
Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him,
"What are you looking for?"
He replied,
"I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?"
"They have moved on from here.
The man answered.
I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'"
So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him.
"Here comes that dreamer,"
they said to each other.
"Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him.
Then we'll see what comes of his dreams."
When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands.
"Let's not take his life,"
he said.
"Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him.
Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers,
"What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood."
His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said,
"The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?"
Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said,
We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe.
He recognized it and said,
It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces.
Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted.
No.
He said,
In mourning will I go down to the grave to my son.
So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard.
After listening to the rest of how chapter 37 played out, do you think that Joseph's brothers were responsible for their actions? The answer will depend on whether or not you believe Joseph contributed to their jealousy, whether he contributed to their hatred with his bad report against them, whether it was the favored status with their father, or maybe the dreams that would one day put him in authority over them. How you answer this important question will probably impact how you forgive when you've been wronged. Some might say that if Joseph had been more humble and his father showed less favoritism, the brothers wouldn't have had a reason for vengeance. Therefore, they should not be held responsible for what they did because they were just victims of their circumstances. But the truth, according to God's word, is that we cannot claim innocence for our bad decisions because someone did something to provoke us. Again, Joseph's brothers had a legitimate right to feel pain. The perception of Joseph's pride, his dreams to rule over them, and their father's favoritism left them angry. They also may have been afraid. They may have feared that Joseph was weaseling his way into a position of power in the family. In those days, the firstborn son received the birthright. You know that. While Reuben was Jacob's firstborn son, Rachel was supposed to have been Jacob's first wife. So it could be argued that her firstborn son should have been the next patriarch of the family. Joseph's dreams would have only intensified this fear. Even so, the brothers could not excuse their wicked behavior. They would have known what God said about murder and revenge. All of the Genesis stories prior to their own story would have been passed down orally. The story of Cain and Abel would have been familiar to them, living in close quarters and taking journeys together in their nomadic way of life. They would have heard about the character of God through the stories of God's relationship with their father Jacob, their grandfather Isaac, and their great-grandfather Abraham. Joseph's brothers could have acknowledged their hurt and their hate and then asked God to help them heal. Instead, they took vengeance into their own hands. And we too have a choice, my brothers and sisters, of which posture we will take when legitimate hurt comes into our lives. Which will we take? A victim mentality, seeing ourselves at the mercy of our pain, or a victor mentality, acknowledging the hurt while seeking God's help in pursuing healing? Even if another person fans the flame of our pain, God calls us to forgive rather than excuse ourselves in order to disobey God's command. Often children make excuses that blame others for their behavior. I wouldn't have hit him if he hadn't kept annoying me. I would have done my work if she hadn't been talking to me. They don't want to be accountable for what they've done when they believe someone else pushed them to it. And truthfully, sometimes we can be like children, trying to excuse our wrong choices because of what somebody else did. In every situation, though, we have an opportunity to do the right thing for the right reasons. Forgiveness isn't one option on a list of possible choices for followers' only way to peace and freedom. Though we might not want to admit the thoughts that we've had about those who've seriously hurt us, the truth is, most of us have wished some severe pain on our betrayers. After we've acknowledged the depth of hurt, we also must be real about the emotion of hate. In his book, Forgive and Forget, Louis Smatus writes, quote, "The act of forgiving by itself is a wonderfully simple act, but it always happens inside a storm of complex emotions. It is the hardest trick in the whole bag of personal relationships," unquote. In the book, he outlines what he refers to as the 4 stages of forgiving. Number 1, hurt. Number 2, hate. Number 3, healing. Number 4, coming together. Smatus says if we can travel through all 4, we achieve the climax of reconciliation. And I know you may be thinking, hate seems like such a strong word. I don't hate them, I dislike them. So if you're having trouble with the word hate, will you acknowledge that negative emotions often follow pain in our lives? Though we may not ever admit it, but our hate towards someone who has hurt us may take passive forms as we silently wish bad things on them, praying imprecatory prayers for them like, "God, take care of them." Or our anger will leak out in passive aggressive statements. And as I said earlier, if we don't acknowledge our negative emotions, we can't move on to the next step of healing. Getting back to the text, even if Joseph egged his brothers on by showing off his coat, or his tattling, or his sharing of dreams to one day rule over them, the brothers' wound took root in the perceived lack of favor from their very own father. Yet Joseph wasn't to blame for being born to his father's favorite wife, or for being the object of his father's special attention. In the heat of the moment, when we were controlled by emotions, we too can find an inappropriate target for vengeance. When we hurt, it can lead to hate or other negative emotions such as jealousy or anger or greed. Unless we acknowledge the hate and ask God to help us heal, we will turn toward fleshly responses. Bitterness and the need for vengeance can consume us when we reel from the hate and envy we carry inside. And though the text does not state it explicitly, Joseph's brothers would have had time on their journey to Shechem to talk about the unfairness of their plight. So when an opportunity for vengeance presented itself to the brothers, they did not hesitate to act. First, they thought to kill him. And even though Joseph's brothers ultimately chose not to murder him, you could say that they reacted strongly to his dreams. But as we have talked about this family, it should not surprise us. After all, they have a history of struggling to control their passion. Reuben, the oldest, Jacob and Leah's firstborn, demonstrated his lack of restraint and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, in Genesis 35. If you remember, Bilhah was one of Rachel's servants who was given to Jacob as a secondary wife to help bear children. She was the mother of Dan and Naphtali. Simeon and Levi demonstrated anger management issues when they avenged the rape of their sister by slaughtering the men of Shechem to the embarrassment of their father. In Genesis 38, you'll read about how Judah struggled with self-control when he picked up a temple prostitute who turned out to be his own daughter-in-law. These were not men who had a great track record of restraining their emotions and passions. So when the brother who reminded them of daddy issues appeared on the scene, they defaulted to their natural tendencies and took vengeance into their own hands. At times, we all feel negative emotions toward persons who hurt us. So what are we to do with those emotions? We have options, just as Joseph's brothers had. We can first dwell on the emotions and let them fester inside of us. Second, take steps of vengeance against those we perceive to be the source of our pain. Or third, ask God to heal us, or help heal us anyway. Sometimes we do all of these. The tough question is, where do we start when we want to heal? Joseph's brothers chose vengeance, which led to other negative decisions, such as covering up the crime with lies. But we can make a different choice, y'all. We must learn how to take our hurt and hate to God and find healing. Someone once said that life can be summed up in two categories: the before and the after. Joseph could have divided his life in this way. Can you imagine 17-year-old Joseph in the bottom of that pit? We find out later in Genesis 42:21 from the brothers' own words that Joseph was distressed. One of them said, "We saw his anguish when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen." Did he apologize for telling on them or for flaunting his father's favor? Did he quietly cry, wondering how in the world to reconcile the dreams that God had given them with what appeared to be impending death at the hands of his own brothers? He was not dead, but neither was he free. He was now living in the uncertainty of what his future would hold. The roller coaster of circumstances turned Joseph's perfect world as the preferred son with a beautiful robe and dreams of greatness to a scared boy at the bottom of a pit with a very uncertain future. Imagine the confusion of not understanding the foreign language spoken by his own captors. For a boy who lived a sheltered life under his father's protection and thumb, fear of the unknown would have been bad enough. But listen, it's likely that betrayal at the hand of his own flesh and blood was even worse, topping the list of crimes against him. The reality of the turn of events changed everything in Joseph's life. Have you ever experienced a moment when you, in your world, when you seem to change in an instant? Perhaps you learned of the betrayal of a friend or the death of a loved one. Maybe you expected a promotion only to leave your boss's office with a pink slip. Or perhaps you've experienced emotional, physical, or even, unfortunately, sexual abuse. As a result, you may have wounds that divide your life into before and after. Whether or not God has given us a specific dream about our future as God gave to Joseph, most of us have had dreams, most of us have had ideas about our future that did not turn out the way we wanted them to. None of us start out in life hoping for things like having a marriage end in a messy divorce, or strained relationships with family members, or having an unfair boss who doesn't appreciate your work, or friends who betray you and gossip behind your back. Often our dreams and realities do not connect very well. Joseph probably didn't think his dream was connecting with reality either. However, we see from the text that the Lord was with Joseph even when nothing else made sense in his life. And Joseph had eyes to see God's favor. As one source notes, this is not a story of the success of Joseph. Rather, it is a story of God's faithfulness to God's promises. The good news is for us is that when we hover at a low point and nothing seems to be working out the way we thought it would, God remains faithful. As we sort through the Joseph narrative, one danger is to try to make a connection between Joseph's behavior and God's favor. Though the Bible tells us in general terms that God rewards obedience and disciplines us when we get off course, we cannot determine how that works out in our lives or in the lives of others. It can be dangerous to try to play God and draw sharp cause and effect lines in our circumstances. Yet often when things go wrong, our tendency is to search for the source of the problem. When we get cancer, have children who don't listen or follow instructions, or are betrayed by someone we trusted with our heart, our warped mind, and this is a warped mindset, can cause us to look for a reason why trouble has shown up at our door. It's not cause and effect, y'all. We're going to pick up there on next week when we discuss what happened after Joseph was sold to the Midianites. Please tune in next week to learn more about our favorite family Inscription. This week we have a 3-part question. First, do you think Joseph's brothers were responsible for their actions? Second, do you believe that Jacob's actions contributed to his son's jealousy? And then third, do you feel that Joseph fueled their hatred by giving a bad report against them and sharing his dreams that would put him in authority over them? Do you think Joseph's brothers were responsible for their actions? That's first. Do you think Jacob's actions contributed to his son's jealousy? That's 2. And then 3, do you feel that Joseph fueled their hatred by giving a bad report against them and sharing their drama, sharing his dreams that would put him in authority over them? All right, that's it for this week. If you're watching at 12 or 6:30, come on over to Dialpad. If you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, you gotta get off. Go to Dialpad. Call 804-203-9011 or meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC. Meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC. Tomorrow morning we on prayer call at 7. Friday we're here doing our feeding ministry. Saturday we have a funeral for one of our longtime members, Elder Dolores Green, at 11 a.m. And then Sunday we're here for worship. You can either come be with us here or check us out online. All right, we're getting ready to go over to Dialpad. Thank y'all. Come join us.